Maybe he is born of grit and hellfire. Chapter 5. Because he slept a little better last night, Peter awoke the next morning after Matt. Staggering out of the bathroom with toothpaste on his shirt, Peter paused to stare, gaping like a fish at Matt doing push-ups in the middle of the living room, the coffee table shoved against the sofa. He'd been joking when he told Ned that Matt might be Batman, but he was seriously reconsidering the theory now. "Good morning," Matt said serenely, shifting his left arm behind his back and continuing his set. "Ready for breakfast?" No, you can finish," Peter said, mesmerized and maybe a little awed. Matt turned his head in his direction so that Peter could see his smile. "That would take a while," he said, and straightened up from the floor. "Eggs or French toast this morning, buddy?" Eggs. Watching Matt cook was nothing short of fascinating to him. As deeply as he missed Aunt May, he did not miss suffering through her attempts at oatmeal or breakfast burritos. He wondered how it was possible that a blind man managed to be better at cooking than May. Matt seemed to know where everything was without having the benefit of sight. He did explain how important having the house organized and clean was for him, but it seemed to go beyond that. There were several things, spice bottles, the salt and pepper, that had Braille labels affixed to them, but not everything did. When Matt made his coffee, he seemed to just know which canister it was in. He went about scrambling the eggs, pouring them into the pan, sprinkling them with salt. He put bread into the toaster and set a jar of strawberry jam right beside Peter's hand. "Aren't you worried that you're going to burn yourself?" Peter asked, unable to quell his curiosity for the sake of politeness any longer. While concentrating on tasks, his father's head tended to tilt downwards, but lifted again at the sound of his voice. "Nope," Matt said honestly. "I don't have to see the pan to feel how hot it is." He held his hand above the stove demonstratively. "Colder, cold, colder, warm, very warm." He took his fingers away before he could touch the side of the pan, then sniffed. "And the eggs smell done. Grab some forks, please." Hopping down from the breakfast bar, Matt winced at the wobble of the stool and resisted his urge to tell him to slow down. Peter went to the silverware drawer, while Matt plated their eggs and retrieved the toast from the toaster. He paused, listening for a moment to the sound of Peter fumbling around in the drawer. "What are you doing, bud?" "Trying to find them without looking," he said sheepishly. "And how's that working out for you?" Matt asked, amused. "Not great," Peter admitted. Gently, he said, "It takes time, Pete. Time and lots of practice." Thoughtfully, he added, "I can't say I recommend it, not if you can avoid it." Alarmed now, Peter said, "Wait, is that possible? Could I go blind?" Chuckling, he said, "Very doubtful. I had chemicals splashed into my face, Peter. You can't inherit what happened to me." "That sounds really painful," Peter said sympathetically. "It was for a little while," Matt said honestly, "but it happened a long, long time ago." He gave Peter a boost back up onto the stool, setting his plate directly in front of him, slowly working through his eggs and toast. Peter said, "You guys didn't have to throw me a party." "One of the most important pieces of advice I can ever give you is don't argue with Aunt Karen when she wants something, Pete," Matt said with mock seriousness. "There won't be too many people there, and you've already met Foggy now." Though he was well aware that they would be devastated if Peter were scared of them, he added, "Jess and I will be there with you the whole time. You can stay right beside us." Karen had set up the party in the office. The weather now too cold to spend too much time outside, Jessica had talked her out of a lot of banners. and decorations, and now, seeing Peter's uncertain little face, Karen knew she'd been right. "Hello," she said sweetly, tucking her skirt carefully beneath her knees. She knelt down and held out her hand. "My name is Karen. It's nice to meet you." Swallowing nervously, Peter shook her hand like a polite young gentleman, but leaned heavily against his mother's legs and did not let go of her hand with his other hand. Karen resisted the urge to coo. Even a 7-year-old had some dignity to offend. "Hello, Aunt Karen." Jessica rolled her eyes over Peter's head, but managed not to snort at the infatuated expression on Karen's face. She was almost as heart-eyed stupid as Matt. It was becoming clear in just these first few days that she was going to be the disciplinarian in this arrangement. "You already know Foggy, of course," Karen said, standing up and backing away to give him some more space, gesturing at the man standing next to her. "Oh yeah, me and Pete go way back," Foggy said, giving him a playful, exaggerated wink. Peter's shy, answering grin looked so much like little Maddie that it almost hurt to see. Foggy held out a fist, and he gave him a baby fist bump. He would take a fucking bullet for this child. No hesitation. "This is Danny and Colleen. They're usually in China, so you might not see as much of them," Karen said, thrilled as she watched Peter hesitantly walk forward, still hanging on to Jessica's hand. "Hello," he said a bit timidly, lashes lowered. "Hello, Peter," they both chimed, Colleen yanking on the back of Danny's shirt to prevent him from bounding forward like an excited puppy. Instead, Danny eagerly asked, "Did you like the present I left for you?" Puzzled, Peter looked at his parents. The tablet," Matt clarified, with a slight smile. "The tablet in your bedroom, Pete. Danny left that for you." "Oh, yes, I love it," he said brightly. "Thank you. I talk to my friend Ned every single morning." "And over here is Claire and Luke." Claire could read Luke well enough by now that she knew he was disappointed when Peter took one look at him and backed the hell up, shoving himself against Jessica's legs, face alarmed by the enormous man standing 3 feet in front of him. He was surprisingly forceful too. Matt grunted as Jessica grabbed his arm, nearly tripping over him as Peter tried to put himself farther away from Luke, but he could only get so far, since he also wouldn't let go of her hand. Hey, she said quietly, putting her arm around him and letting Peter low-key hide against her. "It's okay, that's just Luke. Luke is harmless, kiddo." Peter said, clearly thinking that this was a big fat lie and not wanting to call her out on it. Matt passed his hand gently over the back of his head. You know we wouldn't let anything bad happen to you, right, buddy?" Jess crouched down and met his eyes. "I have to tell you a secret," she told Peter in a whisper, taking his hand. "I really, really wanted you to meet Luke, especially when you told me that Daredevil is your second favorite superhero, because Luke knows Daredevil pretty well." Jessica, what are you doing?" Matt thought, inwardly panicking as he was outwardly calm. "He does?" Peter whispered, looking over his shoulder at the tall man standing beside the pretty lady called Claire. "Yeah, 'cause he's actually helped Daredevil out a lot." Matt wanted to protest that Jessica actually helped Daredevil the most. They sort of naturally divided into pairs, and Luke was more Danny's partner and Jessica was Daredevil's. But he knew his son was smart enough to put 2 and 2 together if Matt started opening up his mouth about all the things he knew about Daredevil, and neither of them were ready to have that conversation yet. "Luke is a superhero too, you know." Jessica suppressed a grin as she heard Danny make an outraged sound behind her. Colleen had threatened him with a literal knife point to stop him from introducing himself as the immortal Iron Fist. Peter's eyes widened, a familiar sparkle of enthusiasm telling her that Luke might never get rid of Peter now. Really? Absolutely, she said solemnly. You're standing in a room with a real-life superhero. Oh, the irony in that statement. I didn't hurt his feelings, did I? Peter whispered, not quite softly enough. Claire hid a smile and gently bumped Luke's side. Maybe a little bit, Jess acknowledged quietly, but you could always apologize. Matt knew he was still scared. His heart pounded frantically the closer they got to where Luke was standing, but Peter swallowed, tilted chin up to look him in the eye, and said, Hello, Mr. Luke. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. You're very tall. We can fix that, his mother said, and then Peter gave a small yelp as he found Jess lifting him up onto her hip, until his eyes were level with Luke's chin instead of his belt. I forgive you, Peter. Sometimes people make us nervous, and we don't know why. Glancing at Jess, he said, I heard you say you really like Daredevil. Claire, Karen, and Foggy watched as Matt's face flushed redder and redder as they all grinned like Cheshire cats as Peter nodded like a little bobblehead and said, Yes, he's my favorite after Iron Man. Matt felt like someone had walked up and cold-cocked him when he added, Because Daredevil beats up bad guys, but he never kills anyone. Yeah, I've always admired him for that, too, Luke said, smiling slightly. Do you know why he does that? Because killing people is bad? Peter answered, eyes narrowed suspiciously in a gesture that was so like his mother, Luke could only smile wider. It's because Daredevil believes that everyone deserves to have a second chance, even if you make bad choices. He believes that you can always choose to make good ones, that anyone can be a good person if they just try. Luke decided to leave it at that, because he was afraid Matt was going to start bawling if he kept talking. Peter licked his lips and nodded. My Aunt May used to say that killing a murderer doesn't make the world a better place. It just makes another murderer. Sheepishly, he admitted. She got mad when Ned said that the Punisher was cool. She didn't like guns. We're not big fans either, Matt said, with a squeeze of his shoulder, cutting off Karen as he heard the intake of air that preceded speech. He respected the hell out of Frank Castle. Matt would even concede that he made good arguments about his version of vigilantism. They were something between reluctant adversaries and belligerent friends. He was also very certain that he didn't want Frank Castle anywhere near his son. What he did made enemies, and Matt and Jessica made enough of those without outsider assistance. Luke shrugged. I don't have much trouble with them. Peter blinked and Jess rolled her eyes as Luke with a wry smile. Luke has bulletproof skin, Peter. He can't be hurt by guns or knives. Unless you shoot him in the head at point-blank range, she thought, suppressing a wince. That is so cool, Peter said fervently, getting a laugh from all the adults. They ate Chinese, which Danny fervently insisted was a tradition when they were together. And when Foggy could breathe past the vast quantity of sesame chicken he consumed, he held out a baseball. You want to play catch? You're indoors, Jess grumbled. Aw, Mom, we'll be careful, he whined, grinning at her when she glared at him. When Peter looked unsure and kept staring at her, Jessica realized that he was actually waiting for her explicit permission. "Go ahead, kid," she said, feeling a bit awkward. "Don't run around and make yourself sick." "I won't," he promised, darting off. Foggy was used to kids, in a general sense. He had a load of nieces, nephews, and little cousins. He also knew that every child was a little different, just like adults. "Oof, he's got a lot of energy," he told Matt, flopping down beside him. Danny had taken over the game of catch with great enthusiasm. "Normally it takes 3 or 4 of them to wear me down this fast." He could see when Matt went from monitoring Peter to focusing on Foggy. He'd actually just been having the same thought. Oh, good. I thought it was just me. Jessica didn't really notice." Jessica's threshold for fatigue was more comparable to a horse than a human's. So she wasn't a very good judge of these things. Everybody was physically exhausted before she was. Except maybe Luke. Hesitantly he said, "It worries me a little. The city is dangerous, and I don't think I could catch him in time if he ran ahead of me." "He wouldn't do that," Foggy said easily. "Pete's got energy, sure, but he has more common sense than that." Jessica nodded, watching their son as she tried to eat her body mass in satiety. He grew up here, Murdoch, and he's a smart kid. Peter knows he can't just run into traffic or go wandering away from one of us. When Danny sounded like he was starting to slow down a little, too, Matt slowly stood and held his hands out for the ball. Danny did not hesitate to toss it, only reducing the force as he had for Peter because none of them were wearing mitts. He cocked his head, listening to the sound of Peter holding his breath right up until the moment Matt's palm touched the stitching. "How did you do that?" he gasped. Matt gently tossed the ball in a lazy arch in front of him before catching it again. "When I throw it, or you throw it," he explained, tossing it again, even slower this time to illustrate his point, "the ball moves through the air, and it makes a sound as it displaces the air around it. I can hear that sound, and I can make a pretty good guess about where it is." It was a simplified explanation, one to slowly get Peter accustomed to the idea of Matt being more capable than he expected, just like cooking breakfast or walking around the city. He didn't throw it at Peter fast or hard, but he knew right where he was standing, and he caught it easily. Hesitantly, Peter obliged him by throwing it back again, holding his breath until the moment Matt caught it. Jessica was a little annoyed that he was so persistent about flaunting his powers, but she also knew that Matt had a very different relationship with his gift than she did. She didn't have to edit her words or actions to appease people around her, mostly men. For fear of retaliation, Jessica was able to act and speak as she pleased because she didn't have to perform social politeness. She either liked someone or didn't, and didn't have to feign otherwise. Her strength was a convenience, a skip card in certain areas of her life, but it wasn't even necessarily a thing she needed to use every day. She was a private detective, not a pro wrestler or a cop. Jessica sometimes went days without doing anything differently from any other person. Matt couldn't live like that. His power gradually became a means to help other people, but it was more personal than that. It was essentially to the way he lived, the way he did even basic tasks. He maintained an extraordinary level of independence because he could perceive the world so well beyond the sight that had failed him. If he kept going at this rate, though, they wouldn't make it a month before having to sit Peter down and explain that his suspicions were correct. His parents were not like anyone else's. In a way, Jessica would be relieved. But mostly she knew she would be sad. Honesty was usually the best policy for dealing with someone you loved, but she couldn't help the feeling that in giving him the truth, they were removing a piece of his innocence. Daredevil and the truth of what her job was would be another piece. Jessica worried that by sheer virtue of being themselves, they were taking that innocence away from him. Matt didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about decorations for obvious reasons, which was why he was a bit startled when Peter asked, "That poster, that's your dad, isn't it? That's Grandpa Jack?" While doing a bit of renovation on Fogwells, Karen found that she claimed was an utterly gorgeous poster of his last fight versus Carl the Crusher Creel. Matt obviously couldn't see this thing, but he was sentimental, and Foggy and Karen had both became attached to it, so it had a place of pride right there in the office. "It is," he said after a moment. He was a boxer, and this was his last fight. Peter leaned into him, a gesture Matt was beginning to think came from Peter experiencing more emotion than he had words for. The small hand clutching his shirt becoming a familiar and welcoming feeling. "Did he get sick, like May?" Matt heard the tremble in his voice and quickly lifted him up. "No, baby," he murmured, weighing the words in his mind. There was no nice or gentle way for it, so he was straightforward but brief. "Somebody shot him." A small shudder went through Peter. "Oh." He stared hard at this stranger's face, hungrily trying to absorb his features. "He was a good dad," Matt told him softly, gently kissing his cheek. "I'm sorry you'll never get to meet him. He would have thought you hung the moon." Can I see Grandma Maggie?" he asked uncertainly. "Is she far away?" "Not at all. Have you ever been to church before, Peter?" Matt did not intend to ask Peter to attend with him, firstly, because Sunday was supposed to be Jessica's time, and secondly, because faith, Matt believed, was a deeply personal thing, a journey Peter would only make himself. He'd only be too happy to help him on that journey, but the decision about it could only be made by him. We used to go really, really late on Christmas," Peter admitted. He remembered being half asleep on May's lap, walking through the city streets, dazzled by the fairy lights everywhere. "I'll ask Jess to visit me at church this Sunday," he promised, "and then you can meet Grandma Maggie." As nervous as she was, Jess thought it was probably best to behave normally-ish. "Ready for the weekend?" Peter smiled and nodded up at her, the bells jangling on his backpack. Matt gave a pained grimace at having to say goodbye, but gave him a hug and a kiss. "Hey," he whispered, "have fun with Jess, okay? Teach her how to make meatballs." "We'll eat a lot of pizza," Jess said slyly, with a wink at Peter. Peter nodded solemnly, before giggling. "Jess, can I take the tablet to call Ned?" "Yep, you can. Go grab it, buddy." As soon as he left the room, Jessica said, "Okay, Murdoch, give it to me straight. I'll take the full rundown." "He won't eat his vegetables raw, but he loves any fruit. He's okay with spicy food. Leave a light on for him near the bathroom. Oh, you need to make sure you fix dinner by 6:30 at the latest, because he won't take a nap. But he starts crashing somewhere between 8 and 9, and once that happens, it's all over. He'll get nervous and clingy and pretty whiny if you've waited too late to get him into bed. You'll have to stay with him until he falls asleep. If he has a nightmare, sing to him." "I don't have your lovely voice," she drawled, "but I am impressed. I think you said that all in one breath." "I'm ready," Peter cried, coming back from his room, bells ringing wildly behind him as Jess held open the door and he ran out into the hallway. "Bye, Matt. Love you." TKO, Jessica thought, smirking at Matt's dumbstruck face. Parker 1, Murdoch 0. Love you, buddy, he called back hoarsely. He shut the door and leaned back against it, dazed, idly. He wiped at his face, sniffing. Jessica was right. The sound of the bells chiming still reached his ears from blocks away. Jesus, I love you so much. Peter was a bit surprised by how close Jess's house was to Matt's. It didn't take that long to get there. As much as I'd like to prove Matt wrong, I really don't know how to make meatballs, she confessed as they entered the building. How do you feel about tacos? I like tacos, he said enthusiastically, staying close to Jess's side as a man in a nice suit got into the elevator with them. Awesome, Jess said, with a flash of her warm smile. The man did a double take like a cartoon character. I can't make meatballs, but I can make milkshakes. You like those, right? Yes. All right, let's call autos and we'll make milkshakes. Jess paused, glancing at the man. This is our neighbor. His name is Malcolm. Hello, Malcolm, he greeted shyly, one hand still hanging onto his mother's belt loops. My name is Peter. Hey, Peter, the man said softly. Peter wondered why he looked a bit sad. It's nice to finally meet you. There was a long, strange pause, and then Jess said, if there's an emergency and you can't find me, you should knock on Malcolm's door and ask for his help. Peter tilted his head thoughtfully. It was an uncanny reminder of Matt, actually. Okay, can we make chocolate milkshakes? You bet, she agreed easily. What kind of taco do you want? Bacon. Bacon? Do you mean pork? The one that comes from a pig, he insisted. She laughed, and it was a nice sound. Yeah, that's pork, Pete. Malcolm nodded at her as he opened his own door, and she was ushering Peter through her apartment. That, he knew, was probably the closest he would ever come to hearing Jessica say, I'm sorry. She nodded back, and they both closed their doors. Do you want to see your room? Yeah. She watched him run his hand over the afghan, touching the red and blue stripes, and feeling the texture of the stitches on his skin behind glass. His baby blanket hung above the bed after Karen talked her into having it framed. It's a beautiful piece of your history with him, and there's no reason to shut it away in a dusty closet, Jessica. He smiled at her. It feels warm. She cleared her throat and smiled back. I hope so. That's why I made it. You made it? Mm-hmm. She pointed to the wall hung up in the frame. I made that for you, too, when you were really little. You did? He asked, faltering. Jess shifted closer, and he leaned against her side, reassured by how solid she felt. I did. Peter glanced down at the blanket on the bed. How did you know? I can't ever decide if my favorite color is red or blue. Ned always laughs at me. I used to have this scarf. Peter cut himself off and sniffed quietly, rubbing at his eyes. But I lost it. A scarf? Jess asked quietly, opening one of the dresser drawers. You mean like this one? How did you get that? He gasped, gazing at the length of knitting reverently. I made it, she said quietly. Just like I made the other ones, kiddo. You made? She sat heavily down on the bed. I told you, you've always been wanted, Pete. It's just that for a long time Matt and I thought your other mom and dad would do a better job than we would. You do a good job, Peter said, his voice very small, head buried in her shoulder. Parker, undefeated featherweight champion. She jumped slightly as her phone vibrated against her hip, startling a giggle from Peter. Trish, the caller ID said, and she slid her thumb over the ignore button, before hoisting Peter, laughing, over her shoulder. "All right, let's get you those bacon tacos." End of chapter.